Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meridith Elliott Powell. Brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Let's turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage. I'm Meridith Elliott Powell. You know what time it is. It is time for Ask for Change, the show where we dive into the strategies, everything that you need to know to accomplish this mission that I am on in life. And that is to help you start to view uncertainty as a positive. Now, I got to tell you, I am really excited about today's show because I have been chasing this guest for a long time. You know how sometimes in life you just meet people, you don't even know them that well, but you just feel some kind of energy, like you really like this person, you admire this person. This is our guest today. I want to welcome to the show, Justin Jones-Fosu. Welcome.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Meredith. I'd like to ask you for change.
Now, I got to tell you, you are one interesting guy, Justin. I'm not even sure where to start, but you've got this incredible journey of the fact that, you said right from the start of your life, you didn't really fit in. You weren't quite Black enough, but you weren't really a white kid either. Then you were this crazy little entrepreneur right from the start. And then you went down this path, kind of like your mission for a while was this whole idea of meaning in life, meaning in work, meaning in the things that you do and doing work that matters. You are a crazy, engaged and committed father. You've got 4 great kids, 4.5, I think. You
Yes.
talk about
Yeah.
your puppy dog too, which even makes me have more respect for you. You do unbelievable volunteer work. You're an incredibly busy speaker and consultant and an author, and then just this mountain climber in general. I'm trying to think where to start. And I think the best place to start, because it's so powerful, is, and I think it's important for the audience to know, let's start with your story. Back up.
Yeah.
Like, how did you even get down this avenue?
Yeah. So, growing up, I liked long walks on the beach. No, I'm joking. But I had these 2 aspects of my story that I think produced different things in me. So the first one, I'll kind of speak to the one that's inherently positive, and it's my mom. I'm a mama's boy. And I remember my mom would take us to events and take us to places that we didn't know a lot about, and even stuff that we disagreed with. So my mom always created this kind of curiosity, this humanity on the other side of people. And so she did that. And her story is fascinating because she was one of the first Black female air traffic controllers in the Air Force. And so she instilled this notion of being a global citizen early. And, she would share, sometimes she'd be stationed in Japan for 2 years. And in that same 2-year time frame, there were some soldiers who never left base. And she was like, Justin, I don't want you and your brother to ever be like that, to never leave your home base and not get to experience the beauty of people and cultures around you. And so I think I got that kind of exploration, global citizen focus and volunteer focus from my mom. And from my dad, when my parents, when I was 4 years old, my parents divorced. And I didn't see, I would see my dad every other weekend, then it became 1 weekend a month. And then sometimes 2 or 3 years where I didn't see and or even hear from my dad. And growing up, it really, I buried its impact until I could no longer bury it anymore. And I remember around my early 30s, I pulled over to the side of the road and just started weeping uncontrollably because I felt like I missed out on something. And kind of to make a longer story short, in 2019, I was going to go confront my dad, Will Smith style, not the Chris Rock version, but the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air version. and through a great therapist in my leadership Charlotte cohort, they challenged me from, instead of going to confront him, to go and hear his story. And they helped me turn a confrontation into a conversation. And I chose to forgive him. And so all of these things, both my mom and dad, they taught me the importance that we have the power to be able to create our own meaning, even if many times in my life I have not lived up to that.
Yeah. You know what I love about that story is that I'm such a believer that it isn't people's intention to do bad things. In fact, their intention is usually the opposite. And somewhere along the path, it just gets mixed up and it gets messed up. And then they, kind of feel like they can't undo it. So you go through this story, and and you've got these incredible lessons and gifts that you've learned from your parents. What brought you to this idea of doing meaningful work, and why does meaningful work matter?
Yeah. So it really started from almost getting fired. I was working for a top financial firm earlier in my career, and I was in global HR, and they had just let go my favorite manager. She was my mentor, and what ended up happening for me is not only that experience, but I just didn't feel like they believed in me. I didn't feel like there was opportunity for growth and all these things. And so I allowed it to impact my performance. And so I was put on the dreaded performance improvement plan, Meredith.
Oh,
And yeah, as a person, and I was HR. So that was the irony of it all. and, and the interesting thing for this was that on that plan, we know that normally people don't come off that plan. They're waiting for you to mess up.
yes.
That's just like the preliminary to get you out. But it was a wake up call for me in many ways because I asked myself two questions. Number one was like, Justin, who was the only person that you can control? And it wasn't them, it wasn't their perception of me, it was myself and how I chose to show up. And the second question I asked myself is, what do I want to get out of this experience? And I created kind of what I wanted to take away, whether I stayed at this company or I didn't. And I started leaning into that. And what I had no idea, this was a whole body of work around meaningful work. So I started getting engaged in one of the councils. I started getting engaged. I started leading our cancer walk. And there's different things that I started doing to create this space of meaningful work. And I realized as I started diving into research later, is that most people are talking about meaningful work in a way that's external to them. It's about finding meaningful work. It was a top 10 thing for millennials, top 3 for Gen Z.
Wow.
But I realized that meaningful work isn't something to be found, it's something to be created from within. And that we can bring meaningful work wherever we are. It's a body of research called Job Crafting by Wisniewski and Dutton in 2001. And it's that we can bring meaning, whether it's through our perspective, how we choose to see things, through our tasks, what we choose to do, or through our relationships, who we choose to engage. And so no matter where we find ourselves, there's always an opportunity for us to take ownership and bring meaning. And why is that important? It's because so many things are happening to us in society. Meaningful work and meaningful living are the things that we can do, that we happen to society, to our works, and to our lives, because it starts from here.
Yeah, I love the idea, and I really want the listeners to pick up on the fact that it really is a choice, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
got asked by a client the other day who got demoted at work, and he was trying
Yeah.
to decide whether he was going to stay. And he said, "How do you strike the balance between respect for yourself and your ego?" And
Yeah.
and I said, I really thought about it for a second, and I thought, I think about it as an immigrant coming to the US, and they've left a country where they were highly successful, and they come to the US,
Mm,
and maybe they don't speak the language and they have to wash dishes. Well, the
yeah.
one who takes that job does it because they respect themselves and they're willing to
Yeah.
do what it takes to get back on their feet. Somebody with an ego wouldn't lower
Yeah.
themselves to do that. And I think
Yeah.
it's important that you can have meaning in everything, right? But you've got to put the meaning into it.
Yes. I mean, in the meaningful work research, is two aspects: is destructive meaning and constructive meaning. Destructive is where we create a narrative that's negative, that I'll never amount to anything. This will never do anything for me. Versus constructive meaning is, let's see where this goes. Constructive meaning is, let me apply the habit of excellence to no matter what I'm doing. And so we always have that choice. And that's why I love one of my favorite books, this Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
Holocaust survivor, who he talked about the power of choice, even going through one of the most horrific moments in society. And so I love what you said, and your advice to your client is that we always have the power of choice.
Yeah. So what led you to start doing the volunteer work that you do? I mean, a percentage of your profits goes back to
Yeah.
giving back to helping communities like the one that you work with in Ghana. Talk to us
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it actually came from forgiving my dad. So, that confrontation I planned on having, that turned into a conversation thanks to my therapist and leadership Charlotte cohort. I remember when I heard my dad's story and listened and engaged and challenged my own assumptions of what I felt his absence meant. I chose to forgive him, not because he asked for it, but because it was my choice. And in forgiving him, Meredith, what I didn't realize is that for all those years, I was holding back that aspect of my heritage because my dad was born and raised in Ghana. He represented that side of me. And I didn't know that I was unintentionally, right, or maybe intentionally to protect myself, was holding that back. And so, in forgiving him, just like this, a wave of my heritage washed over me. And I started asking the questions, how do I embrace this? And I didn't know initially, but one small but monumental moment where I walked across the street because I had the conversation with my dad in his home village. And I saw the joy in these kids' eyes that they didn't have a lot. And the few things that they did have weren't
Yeah.
amazing, right? And I asked to the headmaster and headmistress, I said, how can I help? And they said, hey, we need 90 dual desks. And so we provided 90 dual desks during COVID. And then again, I said, after we did that, I said, how can I help? And they said, we don't have access to clean water. The students have to walk 2 to 3 miles to get clean water. And so we commissioned a clean water project. And I just kept asking that. And so we helped with the roof. We built a new middle school building. We're $700 away from funding the technology labs. We've raised nearly $30,000 for a new technology lab. And then we'll start an elementary school. And like, it all started, I'm an accidental foundation starter through the
Yeah.
Work Meaningful Foundation. And it all started by simply, one, forgiving my dad, which I didn't realize what the implications of that would be. But two, simply asking the one question, how can I help? I had no idea I'd end up here. But simply by choosing to lean into the space, I realized it's a part of how we make work meaningful. So every engagement I have, every book that we sell, 5%, a minimum of 5% goes towards these initiatives so that we can support under-resourced communities around education.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when you give people education, you give them everything. I mean, my father always,
Yes.
he said it was the one thing people could never take away from you when you have an education. I mean, it can, it not only changes you, but it changes generations. But Justin, one
Yeah.
thing when I was reading your story, I was so curious about, is it your relationship with your father that drove you to be such a committed dad? Because I think it's one of the most remarkable things about you. I mean, one of the most appealing is like when you meet your children, and I've only met, your two daughters, but I've met them in
Yeah.
NSA. They're such remarkable young women. I mean,
Mhm.
engaging and interesting and, something that you don't find a lot in kids today. But what is it that drove you to be so committed and engaged with your own children?
Yeah, you know what's funny is like, one, I've never been asked that question, um, and I had an answer that I think is shifting because I never thought about it this way. I used to say solely yes. In my brain, I would think that it was my dad because I didn't want to be like him, right? I
Yeah.
didn't want to be absent, and I wanted to be present. And um, but I also look at the model my mom created. And my mom and I, people probably think that we're a couple when we're together. Like we walk arm in arm and hand, and we joke around with each other a lot. And my mom was super present. I remember those days when my mom would, be the catcher when I was pitching for the Tarpons. I remember seeing her. Again, she's a single mom with two rambunctious little boys, and we didn't have a lot of resource and financially, but she would be there. She would show up, and she would be present, and we'd have game nights and play Pokino and all these things. And so as I think through it, it's probably the combination of I didn't want to be absent with my dad was, especially after my own divorce of 15 years, but then also my mom and how she leaned in. And so with the four kids, my two biological with Lydia and Peter, and then my two bonus kids now through my second marriage, of Isaiah and David. It's been how do I show up for them? How am I present for them? Like, how do I lean in? And so like even at dinner, like we have a no phone policy, and so we ask three questions in a funny, right, just to develop an intimacy. And that those are the things I think that have been meaningful for me because I didn't want to be like my dad, but I also realized I mirrored some of my mom's things and learned from my mom as well. So yeah, both.
What I think is so powerful about that is that you listen. I think it's so underrated in leadership too, that it is so much more what we role model, so much more than what we
Yeah.
say. We remember the people who showed up and who were present, who even didn't do, like game night's not significant. Playing the
Right.
catcher isn't significant. It isn't this massive thing that changed your life, but it's
Right.
that combination. And I think back on my life when I think about running companies, I think about being present, and I think
Yeah.
about showing up, and I think about just being there, and those are the
Yeah.
leaders that have truly made a difference. Now you've got a brand new book coming out,
Mhm.
brand new TED Talk you're getting ready to do Unleash in Asheville, North Carolina. Talk to us a little bit about those.
Yeah. So Stop Chasing, Start Creating comes out June 2nd. And one of the things um, that drove that is I started really having this epiphany. I don't know where, actually, now I know where it came from. I would often talk about presentations about taking the tortoise approach because I felt like a lot of times people were rushing to do things. And with the tortoise approach, I said the tortoise was never slow. I think we've gotten that all wrong. The tortoise was strategic, intentional, and very steady. Um, and and so I started looking at my own life, and Meredith, I realized I was a hare. Like I was all over the place. I was like, "I'll go here, go here, go here," and right, it's like little shiny eyes, like whoa, right? And I said, I want to study tortoises. So I do a thing every year where I do one thing I've never have done before.
Okay.
And so this year, I said I want to study tortoises. And so as I started studying tortoises and learning about them, I went to the Galapagos for a week and studied the giant tortoises and get probably like 8 books behind me on tortoises. And I started rethinking my favorite fable, The Tortoise and the Hare. And I was like, what wouldn't it be cool in an age of so much information where I feel like there's such information fatigue to create something uniquely different? And so we were like, I want to create a fable, but I want to tell the story that we never knew about the tortoise and the hare. And so this is the untold story. This is that the tortoise actually quit the first race he had with the hare because he was constantly comparing himself to the hare. He was constantly chasing the
That.
approval, chasing applause. The tortoise that we all know and love didn't start off that way. He had to grow into that. And so we tell that in a fable like for professionals that's focused on mindset, resilience, and meaningful work. And so really excited because I wanted to put something, not just more information, but how to change how we think and
Yeah.
feel in a world that's consumed by information. And so that's the Stop Chasing, Start Creating. And so super pumped about that. And with the TEDx, when your when your mess becomes meaningful, which is where I'm really telling the story deeply about my dad, and as well as the research around how do we create meaning in our lives. Like those things just came about because I realized as I talk to so many people, right, whether audiences or people in real life, it's just so many things just feel like they're a weight on people.
Yeah.
So many things that are happening in life and society and in our own personal lives, they just feel so heavy. And I wanted to help people, and I feel that too, and I felt that to move away from trying to seek applause and to seek alignment,
I
to
love.
stop trying to seek busyness and to start asking, how do I move into a place where I'm creating meaning rather than just creating being busy? And so so these are the things that I'm passionate about, and as people lean into their lives, whether the difficulties, the mess of relationships in their lives, or within work, or with the Stop Chasing, Start Creating, it's just giving people a new opportunity to have an ownership mindset. I have a little model not a little model, but a model that I teach people around choose, commit, and cultivate. And these are the ways that we found through research that we're able to create meanings. That when we choose ownership of the situation, when we commit to small intentional habits, and then we cultivate those through refinement and resilience, we find ourselves creating some amazing meaning.
Oh, it is so, so incredibly powerful. Justin, it's hard to believe, but we are basically at the end of this podcast, and I always like
Wow.
to. I know it went fast. I want to have you back on when the new book comes out, and we'll talk
Yeah.
further about that. But I always like to end with two questions, and you can end. You
Yeah.
can you can answer them in either order. Obviously, how do people find out about you? How do they find out about your work? And the second is, for those people out there dealing with the mess, dealing with uncertainty, what is your greatest piece of advice?
Yeah. Ooh, those are some really big questions. I'll start with the first one you asked, that they can find me at workmeaningful.com, and or they can find about the philanthropy work we're doing at workmeaningfulfoundation.org. And then I love LinkedIn, Justin Jones-Fosu. And I think the number one thing that people can do when dealing with uncertainty is to ask themselves the question, what choice do I have in this situation? What is a choice? And once we identify that choice that we have, right? Because it's a lot of things we cannot control, but we spend so much of our effort and time focusing there. But when we focus on what choice we have, how I choose to show up in the midst of it, how do I choose to go to counseling? How do I choose to restart date night that we've forgotten? How do I put up my phone when I come home so I can be intentional with the kids? How do I take walks because I care about my self-care? When we choose to take ownership of those situations, I think it allows us to move forward, to commit to some small intentional habits, and then through time we refine it and through resilience. And so that choice is the first thing that I really believe. And we do have some powerful choices, but I want you to write down those choices. Just don't think about them. In the situation, in the mess you face at work or at home or in the community, write down your choice, what you can do, what you can control, and then ask yourself, what's one thing I'll commit to doing to further that, to move that forward and to make progress?
That is so powerful. You always have a choice. I mean, always, always. I mean, man's search for meaning. That is one place where you would think you wouldn't, but it's a powerful choice there.
Yeah.
Justin, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. As I said, when the book comes out in June, let's get you back on. Let's talk a little bit further in that. I want to thank you and thank the audience for once again doing everything we can do to turning all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. We'll see you all right back here next week.